Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, find out how some simple social engineering skills could earn you $45,000, plus how a drug cartel set up their own cell network, and we'll answer the question, are there any alternatives to Microsoft's small business server? All that and more in this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. It's the 35th episode of our Systems Network and Administration podcast, and we streamed it live on December 8th and released it for download on December 9th, 2011, if you can believe that. This episode is supported by GoDaddy.com, and I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on. And the live stream is brought to you by ScaleEngine.com, which is awesome. Nice. My name is Chris, and joining me like every single week is the tech, the admin, and the teacher, Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody.
Hey, man, welcome back to
Thanks for tuning in.
Episode 35, and I cannot believe we're actually sitting at the beginning of December, and it's just it's unbelievable to me. Mm-hmm. How's that new ZFS server that we covered last week working out?
It's kicking ass.
Is it?
It is.
That's great. You know, I spent the because I'm in serious desperate need of new storage at my house, and because I have actually a series of hard drives behind the green screen right here. And during one of the episodes last week, they started making a very loud grinding noise.
Ooh.
And it's just getting to that point where it's getting cold out and the temperature fluctuations are here. So I'm getting desperate for my hard drive search. So I'll probably be covering something in an upcoming episode of TechSNAP.
Well, good news is Amazon got more drives in stock, but they'll only let you buy one at a time instead of three.
Yeah. Oh, I know. It's almost getting to the point where I'm just hoping SSD prices will go down. But actually, you know, later on,
I have a good story about that as well. Actually.
Yeah, and towards the end of the roundup, I have a story about standard hard drive pricing that we'll get to. Alan, we got a ton of news to get through this week and some feedback. Do you want to just jump right into it? Or is there anything else you want to cover?
No, I think we can start.
All right. Well, let's start with this first story that is kind of shocking. It shows you how simple social engineering can bypass things like two-factor authentication and end up leading to like $45,000 stolen. What's going on with this one, Alan?
Right. So some criminals managed to defeat a bank's two-factor authentication system. And then once you find out how they did it, you're like, well, yeah, anybody can do that.
Yeah.
This is, you know, when you hear about criminals actually managing to defeat two-factor authentication and steal $45,000, you're thinking, oh, they must have been like Uber hackers and they outsmarted a bunch of people. It's like, no.
Right.
Not really.
Right.
So basically,
well, and, you know, actually, legend, you know, Kevin Mitnick is a hacker legend, right? And a lot of his biggest hacking feats were feats of social engineering to a degree, you know, getting in and getting usernames and passwords. So social engineering
especially back then where nothing was standard. Every company's system was custom.
Yeah,
so it was even, you know, your standard off-the-shelf exploits wouldn't work like they do now.
Right. And sometimes those standardizations led to complacency in security because they figured that nobody knew how those systems would work. And maybe that was the case in this one. Maybe this was a legacy banking system.
Nope.
No.
So the criminals managed to access the mortgage account of a small business owner and make off with $45,000.
Holy smokes. Mortgage account.
So normally at this bank, sending a large sum of money or otherwise transacting with an account you've never done business with before prompts their two-factor authentication system, which texts a code to your cell phone, sends an SMS message with a code, and you have to enter that code to confirm the transaction.
Okay. That makes sense.
Works fairly well.
Yeah.
However, what the criminals managed to do was, by getting some personal information through social engineering, they managed to port the victim's mobile cell phone number to their own prepaid cell phone.
Of course.
And receive the text message.
Right.
So the criminals, rather than the victim, receives the authentication code, and they were able to initiate the transfer.
Yeah, I mean, my first thought was SMS is handy, but it isn't the most secure transport mechanism.
Right, but they weren't like eavesdropping and capturing the text messages or anything.
No.
They literally just called up his phone company and said, yeah, I want to move my number to another company.
Yeah, it is pretty simple. Usually the phone companies are pretty good about verifying you're the proper account owner.
But this happened in Australia, and
those dang Australians. It's probably their fault.
According to their laws, the phone company asks like 2 questions, and if they're satisfied, then they can transfer the number. And apparently, all they ask for is like your birth date.
Oh man, wow.
Right? If you have
I
the phone number and a birth date, then you could transfer the phone.
I won't name the ISP, and I'm sure this wouldn't be the case anymore. But there was a long period of time where for clients, I could call up the ISP and just say, all right, we want to move their DNS record to here and here, and thank you, and that would be it. There would be no verification that I'm working on behalf of the client, and I was surprised at how often that was possible.
Right, and I was kind of surprised. I never thought much of it until when we moved into Peer 1, our fancy hosting provider. They made us each individually pick phone number phone passwords. So when we call in on the phone, we have to read this password to verify that we're the right user, or they won't follow any instructions we get them over the phone.
Right.
Specifically for this reason.
That's a the whenever you can go the route where you have to have some sort of secret,
a shared
something
secret
you know,
than,
or that they can verify who you are is great. Like I mentioned it, I think briefly in my most recent in-depth look video that I posted, but I've taken to using Google Authenticator on my smartphone, and I tied that in with my Gmail account, and I tied that in with my LastPass vault. So before I can even log into one of those, especially on a new computer, I not only have to have my username, my complex password, but I also then have to be able to generate a secure PIN using the Google Authenticator app.
Right.
Which I would want. I would be open to other banks and institutions taking that. I think the Google Authenticator thing is some sort of open platform.
Right, and the issue here was that the cell phone company only required your birth date. It's like, how many people expose their birth date on their Facebook page, or their birth date and their mobile phone number on their Facebook page?
Well, the main thing that people have to keep in mind, and the less our audience pretty much is all in tune with this, right? But less savvy are people like small business owners that are just trying to get like a website online for like a hair salon, something like that. I had a local business that was doing that, and if you put something like the contact us information right on your blog, sure you want, or on your business website, you want people to know what your business address is. But there's so much you can protect and then combine. Okay, so picture this. If I can match up who you are with, say, the information in a domain name registration, who is, or the location information on your blog, there's a bit of a profile you can actually start to build around somebody. Like potentially one of the common security questions is what was your high school, or what high school did you graduate from? Well, if that small business person worked out of the town that they went to high school in, I now know that answer, right? And I can start to build a pretty easy profile, and I don't have to be like some hacker from China, right? I can just be some guy in the same town.
Yeah. Exactly.
So there's a lot of ramifications that people kind of have to take into consideration.
Some other things the criminals did was after they requested the number to be ported, but before it was, they sent a text to the victim purporting to be the mobile phone company saying we're having network problems and so on, so that he would not be as suspicious when he stopped getting incoming calls.
Oh my gosh. That's clever too, and you could even like put like a little hashtag free message or something like that, like AT&T does when they text you out. Oh, that's
and so they don't in the story they haven't determined how they got his regular banking credentials. Although he admitted to logging in on laptops that weren't his at work and so on, but
you're kidding. Oh.
Right. Well, yeah, it's like your work laptop isn't. It's not. But yeah, it's possible. They don't really say how they got his regular credentials, but the criminals also called his family and his work and so on, and that's how they got some of the information, right? They called his house, and they're like, oh, I'm business associate or whatever. Could you give me his cell phone number so I can call him? And they just did. But eventually by getting a bunch of data about, where he worked, what his cell phone number was, and somehow, his name and get his birth date and so on, then they managed to get enough information to trick the cell phone company.
I'm sure some of our viewers have probably did this too. When I was in school, computers were new, and security wasn't a big concept. And I would do things like I would just wanted to play on the computers, and they would have just simple screensaver passwords to prevent the students from getting on there, something dumb. And you just strike up a conversation with the teacher, and you find out like what their kid's name is or their favorite animal, and inevitably that's always what their password would be. And that's just a simple form of social engineering, but it's also just kind of and having, I guess, a bit of understanding of human behavior.
So what I imagine probably happened here is some piece of malware that records usernames, passwords, managed to capture this guy's banking information. Or it could have been one of those more specific banking Trojans. Now, the person who made this Trojan can't use all the credentials that they managed to collect, especially when it's probably in a different country. So they go onto some forum somewhere or something and say, all right, all the Australian banking credentials we captured, we'll sell them to some Australian criminals for X dollars.
Sure.
Then the Australian criminal has to, from that information, find out what the person's name was and figure out their mobile phone number and stuff to pull off this attack. But when you get $45,000 for doing it, it's all of a sudden that bit of work seems like it was nothing.
Yeah. It's a couple of weeks of hard work and a big payout, right? And then you could probably do a few at a time too. You don't have to just do one. So if you get good at it, you could just keep rolling.
You're better off doing a whole bunch of them all at once really quick and then running away rather than trying to do one and then move on to the next one.
Yeah. I agree, sir.
So the victim's bank covered the $45,000 loss because that's the standard practice for online banking fraud in Australia and most countries, actually. The banks don't want you to lose trust in them, so they make up the loss.
Sure.
But also, since 2009, the banks in Australia have been seeking legislation that would give them access to the telco's database of number porting activity so that they could be, before they send this SMS verification message, they would check the database and make sure that phone hasn't been recently ported or that number to a different phone. And if it has, then they'll be like, sorry, you can't conduct this transaction right now. Call your branch or whatever.
It seems like the act of porting a number to some other end should be traceable, though. Like they should be able to find the ownership of the number that they pointed it to.
It was transferred to a prepaid phone, not a building.
Oh, right. Yep, that's right. A burner. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, and I was thinking too, you could maybe even in some cases just create a Google Voice account as a burner account, because now I think for some carriers Google has enabled porting, so maybe only in the U.S. But yeah, interesting. Any other thoughts on that story?
No, that's about it. But
it seems like with the talk of privacy and keeping information confidential, let's take a pause here and talk about GoDaddy, because GoDaddy.com is sponsoring this episode of TechSNAP. And we've had conversations with them, and we've told them that one of the things TechSNAP is extremely security conscious. And so GoDaddy is rolling a promo out for only this month, the month of December, and it's perfect for those of you who are a little worried about your privacy online. They're offering their free private registration service. That's normally a $10 a year service where they go through a proxy service to keep who you are under wraps. Right. Which really, I mean, come on. If you're signing up for a website online and there's really no reason, it's $10 normally, I would go for it, but when it's free, it just seems like you absolutely have to. Use the promo code TechSNAP17 to get that free private registration, and you can get it on any domain. It's there's no quantity limit, but you do have to use it by the end of December. And don't forget,
especially if you're just doing a blog or a personal site or a site for a project or an open source project or whatever, then there's no reason to have your real name on it. Yeah. Now, if it's a business, you might want to have the business's address on the domain, just so that it looks more legitimate. But for anything that's not, a bigger business, you really should have private registration.
Look at chat room's giving GoDaddy the love. The live chat room always appreciates the supporters of the show. And really, I would say with the private registration is just don't give any more information out there than you need to. And you don't always have to be like somebody well-known. In the case of the example of a local small business owner, just based on the conversations I had of her, I think I could probably collect a lot of information. And one of the key things that is just super low-hanging fruit is your who is information. So you should always do private registration.
You want private registration. Don't put fake information. If you put fake information in the who is information, they can seize your domain. ICANN will take your domain back and sell it to someone else.
And then also, if you ever have troubles, it becomes a nightmare, and it's practically impossible to get it back. So again, TechSNAP 17 to take advantage of that. Or if you're just out purchasing a domain and you maybe missed that free private registration because it does end December 31st, you can use TechSNAP 10 to save 10% on hosting, or TechSNAP 10 to save 10% on anything you purchase, or TechSNAP 20 to save 20% on hosting. So thanks to GoDaddy for the support of TechSNAP. All right, Alan, I just wanted to get that in there because that kind of struck a note with me, and it seemed like a good time to bring that up since they're offering that private registration. All right, well, let's talk about the next story we have here in the main news section, because I never like to hear that my cache is getting sniffed. So this is some sort of new browser cache sniffing technique?
Yeah. So there was history sniffing before with using the CSS visited selector, where they could basically put a list of links on a page And then with JavaScript, look at each one and see if it was blue or purple, right? The different colors your browser assigns to whether you've been to a link or not.
Right.
And the browsers have changed it so that other sites can't tell, right? So if I'm on your website, your website can't tell if I've been to Facebook today or not. So the browser solved that problem, but people are like, well, there's still other ways to figure out if you've been to that site. So this is a new attack that allows the website to determine if you've been to another site.
Interesting. Okay.
Instead of using the CSS visited tag, the new one looks at your browser's cache. Now, this is an attack similar to this has been around for a while, but the problem with the older version of this attack is that it was unreliable because it was destructive. So in checking if you had been to this other web page, by looking in your cache, it would cause that other web page to be cached. So if you ran the test a second time, it would be a false. You would say you went to every website.
I see.
Right. So the new proof of concept does it in a way that doesn't actually cause it to end up in your cache. That way they can tell if you've been to another website or not, rather than in checking actually forcing you to visit the other website and getting false results.
And just so I'm following, the reason why a website would want to do this would just be to let the user know if they've already visited that site, or is it more for like getting data?
Getting data about you, right?
Okay.
Tell if the user goes to Facebook a lot.
Yeah.
Tell if the user goes to a porn site or not.
So sort of build a profile.
Yeah. You can get all kinds of data, right? Is this person go to MySpace? Do they go to YouTube? Or an attacker could put up like all the banks in whatever country you're in and figure out which one you bank at.
Right. Yeah. Well, and advertisers would love to get this information to build an advertising profile around you.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So what the proof of concept does is it creates an iframe that starts out pointing at about blank. Just a blank browser page, right?
Right.
Then it uses JavaScript to change the source of that iframe to a URL that it wants to test, like Facebook or Google or whatever. Then if the browser doesn't instantly return the object from the cache, then what it does is it switches it back to about blank and says, all right, your browser was going to go out to the website and pull it in. So that means it wasn't in your cache. So cancel that. So it doesn't actually go out and pull it in. But we know that it would have. Whereas if you had already been to the page, it would be in your cache and it would pull it up instantly. And it would know, all right, you have been there already.
Right. Huh. This is great. There's proof of concept already for Firefox, Chrome, and Opera, and Internet Explorer.
Yeah, because the JavaScript's a little different. He's got a separate proof of concept for different browsers. But the other thing is that the test doesn't work directly against like YouTube.com. What they do is they test whether you have the CSS file for YouTube.com cached.
Well, okay, so...
Because the front page of YouTube, you're not going to cache that because it has different videos on it every couple minutes.
Well, so what happens if I have like a huge browser cache? This is starting to me to sound like a massive disk I/O bottleneck, sitting there checking all of those files. Like, for example, on a Windows box, if you run a tool like CCleaner and you have a big internet cache, it'll take 5 minutes to scan that entire thing. I mean...
It depends on your browser and stuff. Firefox stores them in big chunk single files, whereas Internet Explorer stored them as separate individual files. And so, 100,000 files take longer to delete than...
But still, I mean, we're still talking... This sounds like unnecessary disk I/O for a web browser.
Right. Well, again, this is only when the attacker's purposely checking a whole bunch of different websites.
Sure.
In the example, it takes about 2 seconds to check 45 websites.
Okay. All right. Oh, well.
So instead of trying to check just YouTube.com, because your browser won't actually cache that because that changes, but it checks whether you already have the CSS file for YouTube downloaded. And if you do, then you've been there in the last couple of days, and if you don't, you haven't.
You know what this makes me want to do is it makes me want to set, like the chat room saying, set my browser to clear cache on exit, but then have like a network proxy server do the caching for me. So that way I still get the loading time advantage of having a cache.
Yeah,
because I just...
That's a good idea.
Yeah, because it just sounds like having that there is just a liability.
Yeah. Well, again, it's not something you're probably going to see pop up on a lot of websites, but it is a possibility. Now, it has to run on a certain website, right? Like it's not something the advertisers can inject very easily.
Okay.
Although it is possible. The other thing is this tool would have to be constantly updated because YouTube or Facebook or whatever changes their design a little bit, and the CSS file name will be different now.
Right.
And so it'll keep saying that you hadn't been to YouTube when you had.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, so there's no known resolution for this issue yet. Of course, it was just announced, so we might see something in the future. You can, of course, disable caching altogether in your browser, but you'll take huge performance penalty for that.
Right.
Especially on some big sites that have like 20 separate CSS files, and you'd have to hit each one of those every time.
Well, in a lot of sites, like I think even the Jupiter Broadcasting site, don't we set to have the browser cache pretty heavily?
Yes, like the Jupiter Broadcasting site sets you to cache the CSS files for 30 days.
Yeah, and then and really we don't change those very often. And then if we want to, we can clear the cache, and then it'll instruct your browser to replace it.
What we do there is we change the file name, so you never get rid of the old cache item because we can't force you to delete something off your computer.
But if it's a new name,
we change the target so that it looks like a new file.
Gotcha. Huh. Okay. So it wouldn't really have any negative impacts on your browsing experience other than performance, really.
Right. It would just mean that every website would take a lot longer to load. Like you would be surprised how much longer each page takes to load.
Yeah.
Because I sometimes temporarily disable the cache using my web developer tools to make sure it's not interfering with stuff. And when I forget to turn it off, I'm always like, why is my internet so slow? It's like, oh, it's not. It's my fault.
Right.
And
especially, and if you're browsing on an SSD too, it's the new web browsers, and with an SSD drive and a good internet connection, it's significantly faster.
I do same. I have mine on an SSD, and sometimes people complain about Firefox being slow to start. It's like mine isn't.
Right. No.
I forget that it's because it's on an SSD.
Yeah. It makes a really big difference. Any other thoughts on this one?
But yeah, your solution is probably a good idea there. If you're really paranoid about this, then you could push the cache off into the network level instead of on yourself. I
guess if you were already inclined to do so and you had the technical means, then why not? Because then the rest of the machines on your network also take advantage of this cache.
Right. It allows you to share the cache between all your machines, which is probably more efficient.
And really, if you've we've done previous episodes on pfSense, and tools like pfSense will pretty easily, if you already have them in place, turn that on.
For Squid.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. You could get it going in 10 minutes or so.
Yep.
Anything else on this story?
No, that's about it for that story.
All right. Well, this next one, this one didn't catch my radar either, but it's a story that takes us down to Mexico, doesn't it, Alan?
Yes.
All right, set it up.
So the Mexican government has shut down a private communications network run by the Zeta drug cartel.
Oh, really? I didn't even know they would have a private cell network or what?
It was kind of a combination cell phone radio network.
Oh, yeah, I see that. 1,400 radios and 2,600 cell phones. Interesting.
Plus a bunch of other computer equipment.
So they were able to establish their own independent communications network.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that it was harder for the government to get cell phone taps or whatever on them, but also they were using it to monitor the government, right? They could listen in when the security forces were coming, or just their own early warning network, right? Somebody sees something, they get on the private network and broadcast a message out. Everybody knows, all right, the government's coming up this way or whatever.
As someone subject to the Patriot Act and Carrier IQ and all the other leaks out there, that gives me a special pleasure they were monitoring the government.
Yeah.
Tickles me in a nice spot. This is amazing. And
also they often painted the equipment green, especially the antennas, and brown, and camouflage them so that people wouldn't notice that there was a big antenna sitting there.
That is amazing. And it looks like it took them 12 months to bust this ring, huh? Jeez.
Yeah, so they want to figure out where everything was and take it down all at once instead of only part of the network.
Right.
So the Mexican government says that it will be a severe blow to the drug runners because on top of their inability to communicate anymore, they won't be able to track the government security forces that are working against them. All right, so they won't know. They won't have the early warning when the government coming up to bust them or whatever.
Huh.
They say that the equipment was valued at about $350,000.
Yeah, I'm sure.
It seems like a lot, but it seemed to cover a very large area. It covered, I think, 4 different states.
No, I actually thought 350 was low. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that kind of raises the question, could a community effort build a private communication network that spanned a large area? Like their network spanned 4 Mexican states along the U.S. border. Well,
let's go crazy. Let's say there's some sort of, I don't know, blast from the sun that knocks out the cell networks for 2 years. What if people just went nuts and just set up a bunch of Wi-Fi access points and created regional community mesh networks?
Wi-Fi is such low power and short range.
Right. I mean, you have to be
on a very, very
together.
busy spectrum space, too.
So were they using something more like traditional GSM, CDMA?
I think they're a little closer to like the
Shortwave radio
CB type
yeah.
radio,
Yeah.
which gives you much better range but much lower bandwidth.
Right.
But
right.
if you're just doing voice communication, you don't need that much bandwidth. And like, your typical cell phone's like 850 or 900 megahertz rather than 2.4 gigahertz.
I don't know. Hezerble, how do you suppose you say that? In the chat room says that he had a GPRS network set up on the CC camp in 2011. And I guess, yeah, so there you go. I experimented for about 3 months with setting up a little local community mesh Wi-Fi network in a condo community I used to live in. And it was fun, but we didn't really go anywhere with it. So,
right. But yeah, it does raise the question is, what could people actually manage to pull off with a bit of effort and a couple of people?
Yeah.
Because I think, I don't know if we covered it before on TechSNAP, or maybe it was even longer ago and something we talked about on Linux Action Show like a year ago.
What?
Point-to-point laser things they built for communication between buildings.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that would make sense, right? Because if you had I guess it'd just be the pain would be lining it up.
Yeah. So, but once you line it up, it's a laser. It goes straight, and you could shoot across to another building. Where, trying to do that with Wi-Fi, you're going to have to.
Right.
The range would be bad or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Anything else on this story?
No, that was about it. I just
Right,
wanted to bring up the idea that people might be able to build their own network and push the telcos out of a lot of these spaces.
Wouldn't that be awesome? Wouldn't that be really something? And, there's...
a network like this would probably thrive more in the areas that are really heavy traffic, whereas that's where the cell phone companies seem to have the most trouble because there's so much on their network.
I'll tell you, the closest I got to it personally for, I didn't bring my Galaxy Tab out here, is there is an app for Android called SIP Phone, and it lets you make phone calls over Wi-Fi using SIP. And, it's just, I can make it, I can use my Galaxy tablet as a regular phone, and it's really cool. Alan, this next story is like almost sounds like something that's way off in the future that we're never going to see, but we might actually end up seeing this technology as early next year. They're packing 128 gigabytes into...
Gigabits, no.
Oh, what? Oh, gigabits. And anyways, the important part is it fits on the fingertip of this. Well, maybe this could be a giant for all I know, but it's going to make some awesome SSDs if this proves to be true. What's the details here?
So Intel and Micron have announced a new 20 nanometer process for building NAND flash chips, which means they can now make 16 gigabytes or 120 gigabits on a single memory chip.
And these memory chips are the size of a human.
Well, normally a flash chip is about that big.
Right. Okay.
Or so. Right. Everybody's probably seen, there's usually 2 in a USB stick or 4.
Mm-hmm.
Or, if you've ever looked at, your video card, you'll see they're just little flat chips.
Little, Yeah.
Most importantly is that this time when they shrunk the die size to 20 nanometers, it didn't hurt the lifetime of the drive.
Oh.
Before when they shrunk the from 65 nanometer to 25 or whatever, the number of times you could erase the flash before it died got cut in half. But this time, it didn't go down. It stayed the same.
That is fantastic. This could be the boost. This could be a big boost for SSDs, couldn't it?
So Intel attributes the fact that they didn't lose some of the lifetime because they're using a new high-K metal gate design. And it's the first time this process has been used for NAND flash. It's something they came up with for CPUs, I think. But it had never been used on flash before, and now they're using it for flash. And they're able to shrink the dies without making them wear out faster.
Fascinating that you're applying CPU technology where they've ran into similar constraints.
I think they use the same technology in regular memory chips. But so the new larger chips means that in the next year or 18 months probably, we can expect to start seeing 2 terabyte SSD drives.
Oh, finally. Now, so Intel's going to sell this to the general market?
Yeah, so Intel Micron Flash Technologies, IMFT, the company it's Intel and Micron working together on making flash, has started to mass produce 64 gigabit chips already.
So so that's the key part. These are already under the 64 gigabit versions are already in production.
Yes.
That's awesome.
So they're not on sale yet, but they're under production, and that means that we'll start seeing 8 gigabyte in a single chip coming out in a reasonable amount of time.
And you don't have any idea how many chips might make up a normal SSD drive? I mean, I know it varies depending on capacity, but I guess with this, they're going to be able to fit even more in there, so the number is going to be more now. which is key.
Well, they fit more in each chip, but the chips will be the same size as they were.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of a wash there. The article that we linked here didn't have the release date, but one I read...
Looks like there's about 128 in a regular, if you max out a regular SSD drive.
And it looks like they're saying it's going to clock in around 330 megabyte transfer a second, huh?
No, not quite. So the 64 gigabit chips will use a page size of 8 kilobytes instead of the usual 4.
Huh.
Now, regular hard drives were using 512 bytes up until we went over 3 gigabytes or 3 terabytes. But the 128 gigabit die will use 16 kilobyte page size. So that means that the controller, the firmware, and your OS will have to be updated to accommodate that. Now, most OS has made the change to support pretty much any size once they moved away from the regular 512. When they started supporting 4 kilobytes, they're like, well, they're probably going to want 8 soon, so we might as well start supporting it whatever size rather than, we write the code once instead of multiple times. But exactly. In that, they'll have to build new controllers that are designed to deal with the bigger page size.
So new motherboards for most people.
No, the controller that goes on inside the hard drive.
Oh, okay. Okay, good.
But, we saw problems with some of those SandForce controllers on certain SSD drives where their newest revision of the controller broke down.
So this one could be essentially kind of a first-gen controller on these ones.
Yes,
so you have kind of a first-gen chip or new-gen chip and a first-gen controller.
So those first 2 terabyte hard drives may have issues.
Might want to pass.
Yeah.
Let the masses buy them and then go check the ratings on Newegg.
Yeah. But the other thing is that the newer 128 gigabit chip-based drives will use the OnFi version 3 interface rather than the version 2. So that means each controller, now some of the drives have multiple controllers to get more speed, will be capable of 333 mega transfers
that's
per
where
second
I saw that number.
Instead of 200. So right now, flash drives can do up to 200 mega transfers per second per controller. This will up that to 333.
Cool. Man.
So that's a fairly big boost there.
SSDs
it's like 60%.
SSDs are really a game changer. I'm sure people hear this all the time. But if you've never gotten the opportunity to move to an SSD, it really makes a huge difference in performance.
Up until about now, for a reasonable price, you really couldn't get more than 128 gigabytes.
Yeah. And it's still kind of expensive, really.
Whereas if this all works out so that, if a 2 terabyte SSD is a reasonable price, then there's no reason to buy a 2 terabyte spinning drive.
And you have to figure, which I know we're going to cover this a little more in the roundup, but with the massive explosion in price for standard storage because of the floods in Thailand, the SSD is going to some degree, be able to capitalize on that a bit. Now, SSD prices...
But, they have to ramp up their production to be able to soak up some of that.
Yeah.
But also, these newer large-size ones aren't going to be ready until regular hard drive production is back in swing.
Right.
And that means that at the same time that the SSD sizes are going up, the regular hard drive prices will be going back down, and it may not result in quite as big a swing as some of them are expecting. But, with the performance difference, it's easy to justify going with an SSD or a smaller SSD as long as it's big enough for what you need, right? You don't necessarily need 3 terabytes of space.
No, I have an HP. Go ahead.
128 gigabytes might not be enough, but that's a big difference to 3 terabytes. But if you can get like a 500 gigabyte SSD, that's probably enough for pretty much anything you're doing.
Oh, yeah. And what I did, my solution was I got the HP MV17, and it has a 120 gigabyte solid state drive, and then I have a second SATA drive in there that's 500 gigs that I can use.
That's what I have in my machine as well.
And that works pretty nice. I would like to replace eventually that 500 gig drive with an SSD, so that way I could run VMs from one SSD and then my OS from another SSD, but that's down the road. Well, maybe the prices come down. Alan, anything else on that story?
Nope.
All right, man. Well, you know what that means. It's time for the TechSNAP feedback. And it's time for the TechSNAP feedback segment. Thank you for sending your emails to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com or submitting your questions to our subreddit links.techsnap.tv. The first question this week comes in from Easy Breeze. He went on to say he was a huge fan of the shows, Alan, and he loves Jean Last too, he mentioned. But
cool.
Let's talk about his question for this episode. So Easy Breeze wrote, I was wondering what the songs you use that you play as the themes for the TechSNAP Roundup and feedback segments. Now, we wanted to cover this question because, honestly, we probably get this question about once a week, and we absolutely want to give as much credit to Ronald Jenkins, I think is how you pronounce his name, because he's made those songs. So the feedback song is his track Snap, and I think you can get it for like $1 over on his website. And then the Roundup bump is that music is Disorganized Fun. That's that track, and you can also get that for like $1. Mm-hmm. The funny story is the way those things the way those music sort of started working their way in is it first started where we were looking for a theme song for Stoked, something to put in the bumps for Stoked, and there's the song that came out called Outer Space, and it's like, well, Stoked is about a show that is about a game in outer space, and I was playing it in the house, and just seeing which ones I liked, and I had a newborn son, my newborn Dylan at the time, and he was cranky and colicky and just, was not a happy little camper. But every time we'd play the song Outer Space, he'd light up and he'd kind of start dancing and he'd be a happy boy. So we ended up playing the song all the time. It became the Stoked song. So first I wrote Ronald and I said, thank you for your music. It's great. I discovered this, blah, blah, blah. I'd love to use it in our shows. And he wrote me back and said, thanks for the story. And yeah, you have permission to use it in the shows. So, and he's done that for other podcasters too, but it's just also just great music. And he's an independent guy. He just posted up on his blog and sells it through Amazon and other various places. So that's and you can find him. We have a link in the show notes if you want to go check out his tracks. He does let you try them and then buy them directly from his site. But he's over at ronaldjenkins, JENKEES.com. So there you have it. All right, Alan. So I have another question here for you. Now this one definitely steps up the nerd factor. The other one was sort of show navel gazing.
Yep.
Yeah. So this one, now did you catch who wrote this one in? I didn't catch the name on this.
Yes, Ryan.
Okay. So Ryan wrote in and he said, having worked as an IT consultant for years on the Windows side of things, I'm very well versed in Microsoft technology. What are my options for open source alternatives to a Windows small business server?
Right. His question was actually like 2 whole paragraphs, and I kind of summarized it a little bit.
Well done, sir.
But yeah, so he's working with a couple of Windows small business servers or whatever, and he's wondering, is it worth it to be paying these Microsoft licenses? And the short answer is that if you want something that just works, it is kind of the best solution. Although if you're trying to support Windows clients and you want to use an open source solution for your domain controller, it is sort of possible. Now, I've built a system like this a couple of years ago for an internet cafe. And so we used Samba 3, and it has the option to act as a Windows NT4 type domain controller.
Right.
Now, that's pretty old. But it did work with Windows XP.
And I would expect, to be honest with you, that maybe with Windows 8 or moving on, NT4 domain support may be deprecated soon.
Right. I think it might have actually been deprecated in Vista, but I've never actually tried the solution I was using on Vista or 7. I had XP.
Might be. Yeah.
So, it uses OpenLDAP to store the actual data that would be in your domain controller, like users and groups and so on. The downside was that it could only be managed with the Windows NT tools, not the ones that come built into Windows XP.
And you kind of have to scour to get those online now if you don't have them.
Yeah, you have to basically find one of the old Windows NT
resource kit
disks that has all the tools in it.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you're used to the Windows XP tools, it's like,
Yeah, absolutely.
But I built a system like this, and the main reason I chose this rather than getting a real Windows domain controller or whatever was that we had users and passwords on for a website already, and we wanted to authenticate those users against the website as their Windows login.
And were those website usernames and passwords stored already in an LDAP database?
They were stored in a regular MySQL database, but we were using proper hashing, and so it was easy to just export those users into LDAP.
Okay.
And so what we do is when you sign up on the website, it would actually create you an SQL and then push an update to our replicated LDAP server, so your user would exist there as well.
Cool.
And then when you go to log into one of the Windows machines, it would just authenticate you against the LDAP database.
Right. Nice.
And then you added in the links, Fedora has a customized version of LDAP that's specifically designed to work as a directory service like that.
Yeah,
for Windows.
And basically they modify parts of the LDAP schema to be, because otherwise there's some modification you have to do to standard open LDAP
Right.
to make it work.
For mine, I had to load a bunch of custom schema stuff to get all the Windows type settings, like what their login script is, where their home directory is, and a bunch of things that don't generally apply to Unix in general.
And because the Fedora directory server has done that, which I think now they call it the 389 directory server. Because they've done that, there's how-to guides out there that let you say, well, you can skip these 10 steps if you use this project. So you might take a look at that.
And it's specifically designed to help you make that drop-in replacement for Windows.
There are other systems out there to replace Windows domain controllers. Samba 4 is working on something that's more like Active Directory.
So Samba 4, the newer version, which is it actually out yet? I don't
think so.
But even if version 4 comes out, their Active Directory support is probably still in beta.
It's still kind of new.
But it basically allows you to emulate a full Windows 2008 domain controller. So you get all the features, like providing the regular, when Active Directory is based almost all on DNS instead of using Wins or NetBIOS and so on. And so
it also implements this, which is kind of important, is its own internal LDAP server with the 80s semantics already applied, and also its own internal Kerberos server, and it integrates with Bind 9, so you get that DNS. You get that dynamic DNS support. So it's a much better approach.
Right, and it also does works better with the regular built-in tools, and makes it a lot easier to do group policies. To do the group policies on the Samba 3 one, you have to basically edit registry nodes.
Right.
So you have to open up regedit, load the registry node, make the changes in the registry, and that registry tree gets pushed out to the client and loaded into the registry when they log in.
Crash Benedict in the chat room says it's at Alpha 16, by the way.
Right. So it's a lot harder to push out group policies on your Active Directory with the Samba 3 style. With Samba 4 style, it's a lot more similar to the Windows style. Yeah,
you can use the built-in like GP update utilities and things like that. And you also would have better support for like Windows 7 as a desktop client.
Yes.
Which would be, and probably going forward is pretty key.
Because even like Windows Server 2008 didn't have support for Windows 7. You had to get to R2 to get all the Windows 7 specific stuff.
The other thing though is, I would say it depends on the business, because a small business server could be some of that functionality can be replaced with hosted services like Jupiter Broadcasting for email uses Google Apps. So and there's hosted Exchange. GoDaddy offers some.
GoDaddy has a hosted Exchange server,
like some ridiculously cheap hosted Exchange that you can get like a user's mailbox for like $5.
And if you have 10 users or 20 users at your company, you don't need a fancy Exchange server like a company that has 5,000 employees does.
So then what you can do is you can use something like a GoDaddy hosted Exchange or Google Apps hosted email, which also includes all of your calendaring, all of your contacts information, and then all you really need is local storage. And there's tools like those ReadyNAS boxes or a FreeNAS box or a small little Linux or FreeBSD Samba server. I would say make sure that the requirement is that there needs to be a centralized user domain and all that stuff needs to be there, because I think IT college training sometimes sets people down a execution path. Okay, I have to get in, I have to set up a domain, I have to set up DNS, I have to set up user access controls, I need to set up NTFS security rights, I have to set up all of this stuff, and then we're ready to go. Now we're a company. The reality is in 2011, cloud hosting is really where a lot of people are going, and you might find that you can put that stuff in the cloud. You're not working yourself out of a job because somebody still has to manage that relationship and those services, and it just gives you more free time and less stress. So you might consider that route too. And there's people out there like Alan who run Scale Engine who can do custom hosting solutions if you need web services or something like that. So I would say really look at the need these days. And in a lot of cases, you might not even need to go small business server, because the problem is that company does essentially buy into a platform that they're going to have to continue to buy upgrades to on a perpetual basis now to stay compatible with their industry. Whereas when you go with cloud hosting services, if you want to move on, all you take out is the data in some sort of standardized format, and then you import it into another place that takes that standardized format. So you're not as quite as locked in.
Yep.
Any other thoughts on that one?
No, that's about it. The one other thing is, if you're a very small business and you're, depending what you're actually doing, like if you're building software, Microsoft has the BizSpark program where they will give small businesses that are developing software for the Microsoft platform free licenses for Windows Server 2008 and so on and so on.
Yeah. That's true. Software development shops can get the hookup when it comes to license prices. So
Right, because Microsoft wants more things to be developed on Microsoft platforms.
I should also give mention that Apple's trying something kind of new. I don't know the details exactly, but I think if you get OS X Lion now, you can, I think like through the App Store or something for like $50, convert it to OS X Lion server, and then it becomes a centralized directory server, and it becomes a file server, and it has support for logging for Windows clients. So if you're a Mac shop and you have a Lion box for like $50 or something in the App Store, you can convert that into a server, and then you get centralized logins that way too. So, and it's not that bad. So there you go. Mm-hmm. All right, is that everything in the feedback section?
I think so.
All right, man, that means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup! And that music means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Now, the Roundup is stories that we didn't want to put in the big section of the news, but we still thought they'd be worth mentioning. Maybe you want to go to the show notes and read a little more about them. And, of course, this week's Roundup was primarily powered by the TechSNAP subreddit, which you can find over at links.techsnap.tv. And thanks to the 346 subscribers over there who submit stories and vote up on stories. The top stories over on the TechSNAP Reddit this week, some of them made it into our roundup, but here's one that was interesting. The Swiss government declares downloading for personal use. That was submitted by Cboy1234. Thank you, Cboy. And
I actually added that too.
I know.
Roundup.
Also, this one, which I encourage people to go read, and also then be sure to read the comments in the article, because that's also important. U.S. Senate proposes bill to eliminate overtime for IT employees. That was submitted by Fredo699. So thanks to links.techsnap.tv.
I have to read that one.
Yeah. Well, it's not quite as bad. That's why I didn't throw it in the roundup, but it's awful. And I've been in that position before. But what is bad, Alan, is the first story in the roundup this week. It's a 0-day vulnerability with Adobe. What's going on?
Yes. So Adobe Reader 9 and 10, including older versions, especially for Unix and Mac, are vulnerable to a 0-day exploit. And part of the big news is that they don't plan to fix it on Adobe 10 until January 10th.
Oh, no, but there's like stuff already out in the wild on this.
Right. So the Reader versions for Windows, the patch should be out no later than December 12th.
Okay.
Just a couple days, which is still kind of a long time, but it, if they just found out about it.
That's next week.
When it gets announced as a 0-day instead of them being told about it ahead of time, that's usually the best thing.
They got a code to fix.
But yeah, for Adobe 10, because there's a protected mode, which if you have it turned on means you're not vulnerable to it, they're like, we'll just push the update in the next quarterly update, January 10th. Although if you have the mode turned off, or if you don't turn it on, I don't know if it turns on by default or what. But yeah, if you have Adobe Reader 10, then you can end up being vulnerable until January 10th when they release the next patch.
What sucks about that is just about every corporate document management system I've ever used that integrates with Acrobat requires that you turn off the protected mode for it to work properly.
So all those people are vulnerable until... also, the Reader 9.x for Unix isn't planned to come out until January 10th. So if you have Adobe and you're on Linux or Unix, you're screwed until January.
Man, oh man. All right. Well, maybe people can just use a different PDF reader. I asked the chat room, and they're saying Ocular, Okular, and also Eviance and Foxit Reader are popular alternatives to Acrobat.
Yeah, I use Foxit.
Yep, Foxit Reader has been a popular one on Windows. All right, now this next one's just kind of funny because you wouldn't think MySQL.com would keep getting hit with SQL injection hacks, but here we are again this week. MySQL.com suffered another SQL injection. This time, the hacker called himself Diamond142, although he spelled it more elite than I pronounced it. And he got MySQL.com with just a low-hanging SQL injection attack, and he wrote about it on his blog, and it's just unbelievable. I just can't believe these guys just keep getting slapped around, and it's nothing like major. They're not like these super elite attacks that shake the very foundation of MySQL, but they're just like, come on, guys.
It seems like nobody pays attention to the website anymore.
Yeah.
Of course, since Oracle bought them, I have noticed that the MySQL website has gone downhill very quickly.
I wasn't going to say it, but I agree.
Just trying to get in there and download a version is a lot harder now.
Yeah, and they've been hacked a lot more.
And also, but the search, since they switched to their Oracle search,
I haven't tried that.
Yeah, so like if you go there to search the documentation, it used to be a search specific to MySQL.com.
Okay.
But now it's
like the whole
Oracle-powered search for all Oracle stuff, and it's like it never finds what you're looking for.
Yeah.
You have to leave the site, go to Google, and say search mysql.com and find me the documentation for this.
Mm-hmm. I used to have to do that when I wanted to get SUSE documentation after Novell bought SUSE. The next story, though, is good news because people have been paying attention, at least maybe. It's nothing set in stone yet, but it looks like SOPA might be on the ropes. A bipartisan alternative is emerging that actually is getting some input from industry players, and also the general public has been open to comments. It's still a form of censorship, but it's definitely not as extreme as
so it's not as bad, but it's still bad.
And this new policy is utilizing existing trade agencies to enforce the laws that they are already responsible for enforcing. Like, so, one of the
that makes a little more sense.
One of the big things proponents of SOPA have been saying is, we need to block the import of foreign counterfeit goods that are stealing American gerbs, right? And what this new legislation is saying is, well, look, we already have an International Trade Commission that's responsible for policing this stuff. They just need to have a new division added, or whatever they need, in order to police the cyber imports of goods, because they're still coming across the border. And then there's a due process when they pull a site offline, and the site owner can appeal the process, which there's actually some chance for litigation in there instead of just being you're screwed.
And that stuff needs to happen before the site comes down, not after, right?
Yeah.
Like, I need to have the ability to say, I think that your basis for pulling my site offline doesn't have enough grounds, and so you have to prove that it does before you take my site offline, not after. Before.
Props to both Wired and Ars Technica. Wired has their threat level blog, and then Ars Technica has their law and disorder blog, and they've both been doing really great coverage on this one. All right, so I did mention that Swiss story about personal downloads.
This one, it fits right in with the SOPA thing. This is the solution that governments should be adopting.
So this is coming from Switzerland.
Yes, so the Swiss government has ruled that piracy for individual use, so that's not actually piracy. The word piracy would mean pirating it and then selling it for money. But if you're just copyright infringing for personal use, that will remain completely legal in Switzerland.
So it would be legal for me to download a Blu-ray movie?
Yes.
I mean, that's awesome.
But not legal for you to download it, burn a bunch of DVDs, and sell them to people.
But, at the same time, that is stealing. That is still stealing.
Well, stealing's the wrong word again. It's copyright infringement, right? Stealing would imply that you took it away.
I'm taking the only copy of a good, right? I'm making a digital copy of a good.
Yeah.
Right.
So in this case, it's copyright infringement.
Right.
But as long as you're doing it just for your personal use, then it's not illegal.
I mean, I'm just completely flabbergasted by how amazingly progressive and on the money this bill is, because my personal thing that I've noticed.
What they did is they did a study, and they also used data from a Dutch study that found that people that pirate video games still buy more video games than people that don't.
That's what I was just. I never bought music. I honest to God never bought music until Napster, and then I started buying music.
Yeah, or people like Ronald Jenkins. You found that let people sample the song, they like it, then they buy the whole album.
Well, he told me that's how people find out about him is he's got great music. People play it in their shows, and then they ask who made that, and then they go buy it. And it is how you make. How an independent artist survives in a internet economy. Switzerland here, I think, is keyed into what is truly the honest fact about most people. I would say 95% of people who pirate were never going to buy it in the first place. But
also they found that people's entertainment budget, how much they're going to spend on music and movies and so on, stays the same. They're still going to spend that much money on music. They might just get some additional music or use the piracy to decide which music is worth their money.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
so, basically they found that the entertainment industry is not losing any money due to piracy.
Yeah, well, I believe that. I do believe that.
And so, therefore, it shouldn't be illegal.
Yeah, well... what can we say to that?
So they actually have links to the actual studies and their data that backs up their point.
The timing of this with SOPA is pretty great.
It's so some countries are being logical and using scientific data, and some countries are being manhandled by the entertainment industry.
Data-backed legislation? I just don't understand how that works. I mean, was it sponsored studies?
What are these facts that you speak of?
This next story in the roundup kind of plays in with SOPA too, because it's kind of like maybe an open movement to prevent abuse of the DNS system, and it's being, I think it's being spearheaded here by the Open DNS Camp. If you guys aren't familiar with them, go check them out. I'm just now learning of this, so I'm going to try to dig in this over the next week, but it looks like it could be a new protocol called DNSCrypt that they're going to try to introduce, an open protocol, I believe.
Yep, and it looks like basically you're doing DNS over SSL.
Yes.
Such a way that it can't be interfered with by your ISP.
Right.
So if your ISP is legally obligated by U.S. law to mangle your DNS records when you try to look up the Pirate Bay, OpenDNS is saying, well, we'll provide you DNS service over an encrypted channel, so your ISP can't tell that it's DNS, so they can't block it, and then let you get the actual IP address and be able to route a connection to the Pirate Bay.
Now, I've heard from our viewers, in fact, we have people that you and I both know in Jupiter Force, the fleet for Stoked. Their countries already block things like Pirate Bay, so they just employ VPN services, and they get around it. But this would let you avoid having to use a VPN, which kind of has a lot of overhead and often just sort of forces all your traffic into one tunnel. This would let you just browse the web like normal, but just protect your DNS queries, which honestly
it's not. This is protection against not just the government interfering, but some ISPs have been purposely like hijacking your Google results or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's give everybody a hard drive price watch update. Now, everybody probably remembers the tragedy we covered a few weeks ago from the Thailand floodings and how they've affected hard drive manufacturing plants. There is some good news out of all of this, at least from Western Digital. Western Digital expects that... well, actually, this isn't really good news.
Cleanup will be done fairly soon.
The good news is their cleanup will be done fairly soon. Here's the bad news. I probably shouldn't have made it sound like it's all roses. Western Digital expects to take anywhere between $225 to $275 million hit in this flood. And while they are making more money than normal, to keep things in perspective, their entire revenue for 2010 was $225 million. So this flood is essentially wiping out their profits.
Right, because they basically had almost no sales this quarter because the hard drives that you're buying now were ones that were already sold last quarter.
Right.
And, they have to rebuild their biggest plant.
And also kind of bad news potentially for Toshiba, though they're kind of waiting to see how things turn out. But Toshiba has said they are now considering selling off their hard drive business unit in wake of the floods, but they're going to evaluate once they have production back up. Think about the impact of that. All of like the iPod storage devices, like all the spinning classic iPods are Toshiba drives. I mean, Toshiba's a massive laptop hard drive manufacturer.
And Toshiba and Samsung have a partnership called the Toshiba Samsung Storage Technologies, which is kind of a similar idea to the Intel Micron flash technologies company. As a couple of companies working together, Samsung's really good at flash memory and so on.
Yeah.
And so, part of the problem we're experiencing right now is there's so few companies making hard drives, and then they were all located in the same place and they all got affected by the same flood. Yeah. And so having even fewer would be worse.
This article, and I'll link in the show notes if you guys want to read it, also sort of charts the price changes. And actually, some good news.
The prices, of course, their data only watches the prices on like a couple of websites.
A couple of them. Like they have the Caviar Green Western Digital here, and they've actually showed a 7% price decrease. So that's
in the last 2 weeks, but not overall.
Yeah. So we'll see where things go. We'll see where things go, Alan, but there you have it. All right.
But, the prices are very different between different suppliers as well.
Now, this next story on the roundup, I was surprised. A lot of people, most of the stories come in through the TechSNAP subreddit. But sometimes there's a story out there where I think a lot of people want me to talk about it or want us to talk about it. So I get it on Google+, I get it on email, and we get it in the Reddit. And I was surprised on this one because it's slightly political, but it's got a really interesting technical twist to it. Iran has said that, and actually the U.S. confirmed that Iran has downed a U.S. spy drone, a really advanced spy drone. And they've even included video footage here that I'm showing in the...
Right, and so when I first read the news story, that the original news story is quoted as having shot down U.S. spy drone.
Right.
And it was like, well, these spy drones are designed to be very stealthy, so it's very hard to detect that it was there to know to go shoot it down.
Well, I guess this one doesn't have any specific stealth technology other than its design is supposed to make it hard to detect.
Right. They're small and they fly low and slow.
Yeah. But here's the interesting twist, though. is Iran came out and said we didn't shoot it down. It was a coordination of our Air Force and their, I guess for lack of a better word, their like hacking division. They have what they're like their electronics espionage division, cyber warfare, and they're claiming that they brought this drone down using hacking methods, not shooting methods. And indeed, this video does show an undamaged drone.
Right. And we've covered a similar story on TechSNAP way back near the beginning, where drones in use in Afghanistan were being hijacked because their communication protocol wasn't encrypted in any way.
I guess also I got one of the people that sent the story in was somebody in the service, and he said too that they have some circumstances where there's something that just it can jam the communications. So it's possible that Iran just was able to jam the communications.
Right.
And then
block the communications and the drone runs out of gas or whatever.
Triggers a bug in the drone or something like that. And they said in some cases, they've seen them fly in circles and then they just come down. And they did say it's slightly damaged.
The last command it got was fly in a circle.
Yeah. Pretty amazing story though, to see this level of, this is a new form of warfare going on, and we're monitoring other countries, and now they have it.
Some of them, the drones are smarter so that they'll say, all right, when I lose signal, go back to where I came from, right? Because with GPS. But you can jam GPS as well. Right? Remember, we covered a story about that a couple of weeks ago where a NATO exercise was jamming GPS, and it was causing problems for people in Ireland. And because it's a hazard to commercial navigation and fishing, they actually had to stop jamming the GPS for the exercise.
Yeah.
But, it's possible for countries to jam GPS and other communications because we saw the same thing happening in Libya back when it was first getting started there. The government was actually jamming satellite TV signals. Yeah. So that the citizens couldn't get outside TV signals.
Right. And we've seen all kinds of signals get... What the key thing in there is, in this particular instance, is what does the drone do when it all of a sudden loses connection to the mothership, and what kind of programming is there for it to sort of recover itself? And if that was the case, then something failed.
If it has that and it uses GPS to go back to its launch site, that works unless GPS goes away too, and then it doesn't know where it is to know where to go.
Right. There you have it.
So an interesting story related to this as part of this. Well, the story started was Iran overran the British embassy in Iran, and then because of that, a bunch of countries pulled out, and the Iranian diplomats were expelled from the UK. But the US opened a virtual embassy in Iran.
I heard about this, right?
And which was basically a website, and the Iranian government blocked it. And the U.S. government came out and say, your internet policies are draconian and you're blocking people's access to information.
It's like, for real?
It's like, you mean the U.S. wanted to do the same thing, and that's SOPA, and that's good for jobs, but when Iran blocks a foreign hostile government's website, it's, a violation of the country's human rights.
That's right. They said access to the internet is a human right. I think actually Hillary Clinton said that.
Yes, but my, your access to certain websites isn't a human right. It's violates the rights of the big media company, or the company that makes Chanel purses or whatever.
I don't mean to sidetrack you, but Alan, you're kind of tipping on my book pick this week. It's kind of a perfect segue. Okay. So as the holidays come up, I want to give you guys a few different ideas for potential good reads for yourself or for family members. And if you have any technically inclined family members, I've mentioned this book before. I want to give it another mention, and a link's in the show notes. It's The Master Switch from Tim Wu, and it looks at all of the previous big industries out there, like the start of radio or cable TV or the telephone industry, and how they've been sort of taken over by big corporate entities over time. They start free and open like the internet is today. Like, people used to broadcast radio from their backyard, right?
Yeah, or also, internet. When it was back in the dial-up days, there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of little ISPs.
Or BBSs, people just ran their own BBS.
And I used to run a BBS when I was like 13 years old.
Yeah, exactly. And so this guy looks at the past industry trends and what's happened there, and sort of breaks that down, what you might see with the internet. I listened to the audiobook version from Audible, and I'll include a link to that in the show notes. It is a fantastic read, and it's at least worth something to consider. And if you buy it through the show note link, Jupiter Broadcasting gets a little percentage of the price, and I'm using that money this year to buy gifts for my family. So that's how I'm doing that.
And I have a good pick for next week.
Oh, okay,
that we
great.
could do for, especially if you're looking for a gift for a slightly younger family member,
Oh,
like,
okay.
Teenager or a little bit older that's into technology. You never know what kind of book to get them.
Oh, that's going to be a great one. All right, cool. Well, Alan, I think that just about wraps up this episode, yeah?
Yep.
All right, well, you can catch TechSNAP live on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is what time, Alan?
4 p.m. Eastern.
That's right. Over at jblive.tv, and join the chat room and hang out with the smart folks in there who are always throwing in their commentary on the stories that we cover. And also you can stream it live from jblive.am in an audio-only stream if you're sitting at your desk or something like that. Then, of course, we release it for download in just about any format you'd want over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. And I recommend you grab an RSS feed while you're there, and you can just get the show weekly. And then you don't even have to think about it. You just automatically get some TechSNAP goodness in your RSS reader. Mm-hmm. All right, everyone. Well, Alan, thanks for the great show, and thanks to everyone for tuning in to this week's episode of TechSNAP, and we'll see you right back here next week.